Have you ever wondered why so many people believe the world is flat? If you're anything like me, then you probably assumed it was because these folks are ignorant, misinformed, or just plain stupid. But in today's video, I want to suggest that there might be something else going on here. Something more interesting and more important. So stay tuned, because we're about to get real weird, real fast. Hello, I make videos about the hidden reality that we can't see, from the tiniest subatomic particles to the greatest mysteries of the universe. And today we're going to be exploring one of my favorite topics, the flat Earth theory. Now I know this sounds crazy because there's so much evidence that the Earth is actually a sphere, but the fact that so many people still believe otherwise has led some experts to hypothesize that our intuitions about reality may be flawed. So let's dive into what the research says about this. It turns out that most people didn't always think the Earth was round. In fact, before the 16th century, pretty much everyone believed the world was flat. There are some ancient Greek philosophers like Pythagoras who had the right idea, but even they couldn't prove it. That wasn't until over 2,000 years later, when the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan circumnavigated the globe between 1519 and 1522. Now this isn't to say everyone immediately started believing the Earth was round after this, but by the 18th century, when Enlightenment thinkers were valuing reason and observation over tradition and dogma, it started to become common knowledge. But now that we know the Earth is round, why do so many people still claim it's flat? Well, some researchers argue that it's not necessarily because they're ignorant or misinformed. Instead, it could be because of a misunderstanding of statistics. Here's what they mean. If I showed you a bag of marbles and told you that without looking, you were going to reach in and pick one out, and then I said that marble would have to be blue, would you think I was lying? No, of course not. You'd know that there are other colors of marbles in there too, right? Well, the same goes for the shape of the Earth. Most flat earthers aren't stupid. They just have a misunderstanding of probability. They haven't really thought about how likely it is that all of us, throughout all of human history, have been duped by a global conspiracy. In other words, if you're flat earther, you're not wrong. You just need to be a little bit less gullible. To be fair, though, there's nothing wrong with being skeptical of authority. We should always question everything. But where do you draw the line? How do you decide when to trust authorities like NASA and scientists and when to reject them? Well, here's the thing. If you look at all of human history, you'll find that in the vast majority of cases, it's been better to trust experts than not. This is because, generally speaking, experts are people who have devoted their lives to acquiring knowledge. It's literally their job to get to the bottom of things. Meanwhile, most people just have their own lives to worry about. And while someone can dedicate their life to acquiring knowledge about plumbing, say, or auto mechanics, how many people do you know who have dedicated their entire lives to proving that the Earth is flat? Yeah, exactly. Not only does it make more sense to trust the experts in this case, but it also makes more sense to consider why these people are still clinging to their beliefs in the first place. You see, for a lot of flat earthers, this isn't just a casual belief. It's a whole way of life. It's a world view, and as such it affects every part of their existence. For example, you won't find many flat earthers using GPS, driving on highways, getting on airplanes, or doing anything else that requires a basic understanding of geometry. Why? Because modern conveniences like these rely on the fact that the Earth is round. And if you don't believe that, then a lot of stuff starts to make a lot less sense. Okay, so maybe that explains why so many flat earthers are wary of experts and authority. But why do they cling to their beliefs so tightly in the first place? Well, it might be because of what psychologists call an implicit personality theory. Basically, this is the idea that each person has a theory in their head about how other people behave. They form this theory based on their past experiences and then use it to predict how people will act in the future. For example, if you had a bad experience with a mechanic who overcharged you, you might develop a theory that mechanics are all greedy and dishonest. Then, the next time you need a car repair, you might take it somewhere else or just drive around without fixing it. Well, something similar is going on with flat earthers, except instead of forming a theory about mechanics, they're forming a theory about scientists. And the problem is that those theories tend to be pretty inaccurate. Here's what I mean. Scientists, by and large, are motivated by curiosity. They're genuinely interested in figuring out how the world works. On the other hand, if you look at most conspiracy theorists, you'll find that they're motivated by something quite different. For example, according to the psychologist Gordon Gallup, many flat earthers he's interviewed report feeling alienated, disconnected, and angry. Some report feeling powerless or that their lives lack meaning. And for these individuals, the flat earth theory is a way of reclaiming control. It's a way of saying, I might be powerless in most aspects of my life, but I am in control of this one tiny aspect. The fact that I know the earth is flat means something to me. It gives my life meaning. And while that's certainly understandable, it doesn't change the fact that it's just not true. And that's where things start to get interesting, because it turns out that there are actual psychological benefits to believing things that are not true. For example, in a study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, researchers found that people who believed false conspiracy theories were less anxious about ambiguous events. In other words, if something bad happens, conspiracy theorists are better able to cope with it because they already have an explanation for why it happened. Meanwhile, non-conspiracy theorists tend to feel more threatened by ambiguous events because they don't know what to make of them. Here's another example. When faced with distressing information, people who believe in conspiracies are able to ignore it without feeling too guilty. That's because they don't trust the source of the information anyway. But people who don't believe in conspiracies tend to feel guilty if they ignore distressing information. After all, they know the information is true. They just don't know what to do with it. Now, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but there are other examples of this too. For example, in 2017, researchers found that people who believed in fake news were more resistant to stress. Why? Because they didn't trust the media anyway, so they weren't that bothered when they turned out to be right. Similarly, in 2018, researchers found that people who believed in anti-vaccination conspiracies were more resilient to fear-based messages about vaccines. That's because they didn't trust the sources of the information anyway. Alright, so now you're probably wondering how any of this applies to flat earthers. Well, the same thing is probably going on with them too. By rejecting modern science, they've opened themselves up to a whole host of psychological benefits. For example, they don't have to worry about climate change. It's not real. They don't have to worry about pandemics. They're not real either. And they don't have to worry about nuclear war because it's all just a big lie perpetuated by the powers that be. The fact of the matter is, most flat earthers aren't stupid. They just don't trust authority. And when they reject that authority, they open themselves up to a whole host of psychological benefits. So, while it might seem like a simple case of ignorance or misinformation, it's actually a lot more complex than that. But don't worry, there is good news. According to the researchers I spoke to, flat earthers are fairly easy to spot. Just look for the telltale signs like aluminum foil hats, homemade EMF meters, and an unhealthy obsession with government conspiracies. Thanks for watching. And as always, thanks for watching. And if you like this video, check out this one next.